Hi, I'm Kayla. 3 months ago, my sister-in-law showed up at my door at 4 in the morning with 2 broken ribs, a split lip, and terror in her eyes that I'll never forget. My brother Marcus had finally crossed a line I didn't even know existed. What I did next didn't just end his marriage, it ended everything he'd built his identity on. Some people called me a family destroyer, others called me a hero. I call myself someone who finally stopped being silent. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The knocking started soft, almost apologetic, like whoever was outside didn't want to wake me but had nowhere else to go. I remember checking my phone first, 4:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in February. The kind of Oregon winter morning where the rain hits your windows sideways and the cold seeps through every crack in the building. I lived alone then, in a ground-floor apartment at Pine Ridge, the kind of place where thin walls meant you heard every argument and every makeup session from the units around you. I shuffled to the door in my oversized sweater and fuzzy socks, expecting maybe Mrs. Chen from upstairs having another panic attack, or possibly someone with the wrong address. What I didn't expect was Tessa, my brother's wife of 2 years, standing there in pajama pants and a rain-soaked jacket, holding her ribs like they were made of glass. Her face was a roadmap of fresh bruises. Purple bloomed across her left cheekbone, and her bottom lip was split clean through the middle, dried blood crusted at the corner. But it was her eyes that hit me like a punch to the stomach. Wide, darting, the kind of fear you see in cornered animals. She kept looking over her shoulder toward the parking lot, as if Marcus might materialize from the shadows. "Kayla," she whispered, and her voice cracked on my name. "I'm sorry." I didn't know where else to go. I pulled her inside without a word, locked the deadbolt, and immediately went to close the blinds. The apartment felt different with her terror filling the space, smaller, more fragile. She moved like every step sent lightning through her torso, one arm wrapped protectively around her middle. "Sit down," I said, guiding her to the couch. "Don't move. I'm calling 911. "No!" The word exploded from her with such force that she doubled over, gasping. "Please, Kayla, no police, not yet. I just need—" She trailed off, staring at her hands. I'd seen enough injuries at the physical therapy clinic to recognize the signs. The way she breathed in short, careful sips. How she couldn't straighten up completely. The protective posture that screamed broken ribs. My hands shook as I grabbed my first aid kit from the bathroom cabinet, my mind racing with questions I was afraid to ask. "What happened?" I asked, though part of me already knew. I'd been pretending not to see the signs for months. The way Tessa had become quieter at family dinners. How she'd started wearing long sleeves, even in summer. The nervous laugh she'd developed whenever Marcus made one of his cutting jokes about her cooking or her job at the bookstore. She stared at the coffee table for a long time before speaking. He came home drunk again, around midnight. I was already asleep, but he turned on all the lights, started yelling about dinner not being ready when he got back from his poker game. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I tried to explain that he never told me he'd be home late, but that just made him angrier. I cleaned the cut on her lip with gentle touches, fighting to keep my hands steady. "Tessa, this isn't the first time, is it?" The question hung in the air like smoke. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they were filled with tears she'd probably been holding back for hours. "No, but it's never been this bad. Usually he just pushes me around a little, calls me names. Tonight he kept hitting, and when I fell, he kicked me in the ribs. I heard them crack, Kayla. I actually heard them break. Rage built in my chest like a forest fire. Marcus, my older brother who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with algebra homework. Marcus, who'd been my protector when kids at school picked on me for being too tall and too awkward. That Marcus had put his hands on this gentle woman who wouldn't hurt a spider if it was crawling across her face. "We have to call the police," I said again, more firmly this time. "He said if I ever told anyone, he'd kill me." The words came out flat, matter of fact. Not in anger, Kayla. Calm as anything. Like he was telling me what he wanted for breakfast. I'll kill you, Tessa. And everyone will believe it was an accident because you're so clumsy. I'd heard Marcus use that tone before, usually when he was explaining why his way of doing things was the only logical choice. The reasonable voice he used to make you feel stupid for disagreeing. It was the same voice he'd used to convince our parents that his girlfriend in high school had been lying when she accused him of getting rough during arguments. The same voice he'd used to explain away the bruises on his ex-fiancée, his arms as accidents during their, quote, playful wrestling. The pattern had been there all along. I'd just been too loyal, too willing to believe that my brother couldn't be capable of something so monstrous. But seeing Tessa's broken body curled on my couch, I realized that loyalty without accountability isn't love. It's enabling. Stay here, I told her. I'm making some calls. The first call was to Diego, my boyfriend of 8 months. He was working the night shift as a paramedic, and I knew he'd answer even if he was in the middle of a call. Diego had seen enough domestic violence cases to know exactly what we were dealing with. Kayla, everything okay? His voice was alert despite the early hour. I need you to come to my apartment when your shift ends. Tessa's here, and she's hurt bad. Marcus beat her up. The silence stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then Diego spoke, and his voice was harder than I'd ever heard it. How bad? Broken ribs. Facial bruises. She's terrified, Diego. What do I do? Document everything. Photos, her statement, everything. Don't let her shower or change clothes yet. And Kayla? Don't call your parents until we figure this out. They'll try to smooth it over, and that could get her killed. He was right. Frank and Carol Brennan had perfected the art of keeping family problems inside the family. When Marcus had been arrested for bar fights in college, Dad had hired a lawyer and made it disappear. When Marcus had been fired from his last construction job for showing up drunk, Mom had spent weeks calling in favors to get him the supervisor position at Riverside Construction. They loved their eldest son with the kind of fierce blindness that excused everything and questioned nothing. The second call was harder. Zoe Walsh had been my roommate in college, and now she worked as a social worker specializing in domestic violence cases. She'd been the one to help me recognize the red flags in my own past relationships, teaching me that love shouldn't feel like walking on eggshells. Zoe, I'm sorry to wake you, but I need help. Talk to me. I explained the situation in whispers while Tessa dozed fitfully on the couch, her breathing shallow and pained. Zoe listened without interrupting, asking pointed questions about Tessa's injuries and mental state. She needs medical attention, Zoe said finally. Those ribs could puncture something vital. And Kayla? This escalation pattern, going from pushes and name-calling to broken bones, it means he's losing control. The next time could be fatal. She won't go to the hospital. She's too scared. Then bring the hospital to her. You said your boyfriend's a paramedic? Have him do an unofficial assessment, but she needs x-rays and proper medical documentation. Even if she's not ready to press charges now, she'll need that evidence later. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen, staring out at the gray pre-dawn sky. Rain continued to pelt the windows in steady sheets, and somewhere out there, Marcus was probably passed out drunk, unaware that his carefully constructed world was about to crumble. I'd grown up believing that family was everything, that blood was thicker than water, that you stood by your people no matter what. But sitting there in the dark, listening to Tessa's labored breathing from the living room, I understood something fundamental had shifted. Real family doesn't break each other's bones. Real love doesn't leave bruises that need to be hidden under makeup and long sleeves. When Diego arrived 2 hours later, still in his paramedic uniform, he moved through my apartment like he was responding to an emergency call. Professional, thorough, gentle. He examined Tessa with clinical efficiency while I held her hand, documenting each injury with photographs and careful notes. Definitely broken ribs, he confirmed quietly. At least 2, maybe 3. The bruising pattern on her torso suggests multiple impacts, kicks or punches. Face shows signs of repeated blunt force trauma. This wasn't a single moment of lost temper. This was sustained violence. Tessa had been awake for his examination, answering questions in monosyllables, flinching whenever a car door slammed in the parking lot outside. Now she lay on her side on my couch, staring at nothing, looking smaller than her 25 years.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
What happens now? I asked Diego in the kitchen. Now you decide if you're going to be part of the solution or part of the cover-up, he said bluntly. Because those are the only two options. There's no middle ground with domestic violence. I knew he was right. I'd already crossed a line by helping Tessa, by documenting her injuries, by calling people outside the family. Marcus would see it as betrayal, and my parents would see it as disloyalty. But looking at Tessa's broken form on my couch, I realized I'd been betraying someone far more important, the woman my brother had promised to love and protect. The third call was the hardest one I'd ever made. I dialed my parents' number at 7 in the morning, knowing Dad would already be up drinking coffee and reading the news on his tablet. Mom would be getting ready for her shift at the bank, moving through the same routine she'd followed for 20 years. Kayla? Honey, why are you calling so early? Mom's voice was thick with sleep despite the hour. Mom, I need you and Dad to come over to my apartment. It's about Marcus and Tessa. The pause stretched long enough for me to hear my heartbeat in my ears. What kind of trouble has he gotten into now? Even in that moment, her first instinct was to assume Marcus was the victim of circumstances rather than the cause of them. It was a reflex born of years of practice, polished to automatic perfection. Just come over, Mom. Both of you. We need to talk. Is he in jail again? Kayla, you know your father's blood pressure can't handle. Mom, my voice cut through her spiraling anxiety. Tessa is here. She's hurt. We need to handle this as a family. Another pause, this one different, heavier. How hurt? Broken ribs? Facial bruises? She showed up at my door at 4 this morning. The silence that followed was the sound of a family secret becoming impossible to ignore. When Mom spoke again, her voice had changed. Flatter, more careful. We'll be right over. While we waited, I made Tessa tea and toast, though she could barely manage a few sips and bites. She kept touching her ribs gingerly, wincing with each breath. Diego had given her some over-the-counter pain medication, but there wasn't much more he could do without proper medical equipment. He's going to be so angry, she whispered, staring out my window at the parking lot, when he wakes up and I'm not there to make coffee and clean up whatever mess he left. He hates it when his routine gets disrupted. The way she talked about Marcus's preferences and habits made my stomach turn. She'd become a person whose entire existence revolved around managing someone else's emotions, anticipating their needs, preventing their anger. It was a kind of emotional prison I couldn't fully comprehend. Tessa, I said carefully, how long has he been hitting you? She was quiet for so long that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she spoke, her voice barely audible. The first time was 3 months after we got married. He'd had a bad day at work, and I made salmon for dinner instead of the chicken he wanted. He said I never listened to him, that I was selfish and thoughtless. When I tried to explain that he'd never told me what he wanted, he backhanded me across the face. My hands clenched involuntarily around my coffee mug. What did you do? I was so shocked I just stood there. He immediately started crying, saying he was sorry that he'd never done anything like that before. He blamed it on stress from the new job, promised it would never happen again. He bought me flowers the next day and took me out for an expensive dinner. She touched her split lip absently. For a while, I believed him. The hitting didn't happen often at first, maybe once every few months when he was really stressed. And afterward, he was always so sorry, so loving. It was the classic cycle that Diego had explained to me during his domestic violence training. Tension building, acute violence, reconciliation and calm, then back to tension building again. Each cycle making the violence more normalized, the victim more isolated, the abuser more confident that they could get away with it. When did it get worse? I asked. Around Christmas. He got passed over for a promotion he thought he deserved, and his drinking got heavier. The hitting became more frequent, and the apologies got shorter. Last month, he stopped apologizing altogether. He started saying I deserved it for being stupid or clumsy or ungrateful. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I started to believe him, Kayla. I started thinking that maybe if I just tried harder, if I was better at anticipating what he needed, maybe he'd go back to being the man I married. That was when I understood the full horror of what Marcus had done. He hadn't just broken her ribs and split her lip. He'd broken her sense of reality, her understanding of her own worth, her ability to trust her own perceptions. He'd systematically destroyed the confident, laughing woman who joined our family 2 years ago and replaced her with this frightened shell who apologized for existing. The knock on my door came at exactly 8 o'clock. My parents had always been punctual people, treating lateness as a character flaw rather than a simple mistake. I opened the door to find them both standing stiffly in the hallway, Dad in his work clothes, and Mom still in her bank uniform. They stepped inside without the usual hugs and greetings, their eyes immediately finding Tessa on the couch. Mom's hand flew to her mouth when she saw the extent of the bruising. Dad's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, and then something that looked almost like resignation. "Dear God," Mom whispered. "Tessa, honey, what happened?" Before Tessa could answer, I stepped forward. Marcus beat her up, broke her ribs, split her lip, and threatened to kill her if she told anyone. Dad's jaw tightened. "That's a serious accusation, Kayla." "It's not an accusation. It's what happened. Look at her, Dad." Mom moved toward the couch, her nursing instincts overriding whatever complicated emotions she was feeling. "Sweetie, you need to go to the hospital. Those ribs could be dangerous if they're displaced." "No hospitals," Tessa said quickly. "Please, if there's a record, he'll find out. He always finds out everything." Dad ran his hand through his thinning hair, a gesture I recognized from every family crisis we'd ever faced. "Maybe we should call Marcus first, get his side of the story. There might be more to this than—" "More to this?" I interrupted, incredulous. "What more could there possibly be? She has broken bones, Dad. Broken bones that he gave her with his fists and his boots. People fight, Kayla. Marriages go through rough patches. Maybe they both got carried away." "Stop!" The word came out sharper than I'd intended. "Don't you dare try to make this her fault, too. Don't you dare suggest that she somehow deserved to have her ribs broken by the man who promised to love and protect her." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Tessa's shallow breathing, and the rain continuing to hammer against the windows. We were at a crossroads, and everyone in that room knew it. The old patterns, protect Marcus, minimize the damage, keep it in the family, were warring with the evidence sitting bruised and broken on my couch. Mom looked between Tessa and Dad, clearly torn between her maternal instincts and her loyalty to her eldest son. Dad stared at his hands, probably calculating the potential fallout of various courses of action. Finally, Tessa spoke into the silence, her voice stronger than it had been all morning. "I love Marcus. I married him because I believed he was a good man who'd had some bad breaks in life. But last night, when he was kicking me while I was on the floor, I realized that the man I married either never existed or he's gone forever." She struggled to sit up straighter, wincing with the effort. "I'm not asking you to choose sides, I'm asking you to help me figure out how to survive this. Because if I go back to that house, if I pretend this didn't happen, he's gonna kill me eventually. Maybe not this week or this month, but eventually." The truth of her words settled over the room like a weight. This wasn't about taking sides or protecting family loyalty. This was about preventing a murder. That moment of clarity from Tessa seemed to break something loose in the room. Mom sank into the armchair across from the couch, her face pale and drawn. Dad continued staring at his hands, but I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. The comfortable fiction they'd maintained about their eldest son was crumbling in real time. "We need to think this through carefully," Dad said finally, his voice heavy. "If we handle this wrong, it could destroy the whole family." I felt heat rise in my chest. "The family is already destroyed, Dad. Marcus destroyed it the first time he put his hands on his wife." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." His voice carried that familiar edge of authority, the tone he'd used when I was 16 and arguing about curfew. "If this becomes public, if charges are filed, Marcus could lose his job, the house, everything. Quote, good," I said flatly. "Maybe he should lose everything." Maybe that's what it takes for him to understand that actions have consequences. Mom spoke up for the first time since sitting down. "Kayla, honey, I know you're upset, but we have to think about the bigger picture here. Tessa, sweetie, has Marcus ever gotten help for his drinking? Anger management classes, maybe?" Even in crisis, she was reaching for solutions that didn't require acknowledging the full scope of what Marcus had become. It was the same instinct that had led her to make excuses for his bar fights, his job troubles, his pattern of relationships that ended with women fleeing in tears. Tessa looked up at Mom with something that might have been pity. "Mrs. Brennan, your son threatened to kill me. Not in the heat of anger, but afterward, when he was calm. He told me exactly how he'd make it look like an accident. That's not something you fix with a few counseling sessions." The room fell silent again. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the apartment complex waking up. Doors closing, cars starting, people heading off to normal jobs where they didn't have to navigate around broken ribs and death threats. My phone buzzed with a text message. The name on the screen made my stomach drop. Marcus. Where the hell is Tessa? She wasn't here when I woke up and her car's gone. If you know something, you better tell me now. I showed the message to Diego, who read it and immediately moved to the window to check the parking lot. "Is that his truck?" he asked, pointing to a red Ford parked near the dumpsters. Tessa's face went white. "He's here. Oh God, he's here. How did he find me?" "Find my phone app," I said, realization hitting me like a slap. "He probably tracks your location." Diego was already moving, checking the locks on my door and windows. "Do you have a back exit?" "Through the sliding door to the patio, but it just leads to the courtyard." Another text came through, this one angrier. "I know she's with you, Kayla. Bring her out now, or I'm coming in." Dad stood up abruptly. "I'll go talk to him, man to man. We can sort this out reasonably." "No." The word came from Tessa with surprising force. "Mr. Brennan, with all due respect, you don't understand what he's like when he's angry. He won't listen to reason. He won't be embarrassed into backing down. He'll just get more violent." As if summoned by her words, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside my apartment. Then came the pounding on the door, so hard the frame shook. "Tessa, get out here now!" Mom jumped at the sound, pressing her hand to her chest. This was Marcus's voice, but it was distorted by rage into something barely human. The careful control he usually maintained around our parents was completely gone. "Kayla, open this door right now! I know she's in there!" Diego positioned himself between the door and the rest of us, his paramedic training kicking in. "Call 911, he said quietly. "Now." I dialed with shaking fingers while Marcus continued hammering on the door. The dispatcher's calm voice was a strange contrast to the chaos erupting in my hallway. 911, what's your emergency?" "I need police at Pine Ridge Apartments, Unit 14B. My brother is trying to break down my door. He's violent and he's been beating his wife." "Are you in immediate danger?" Marcus's voice roared through the door. "I'll break this thing down if I have to." "Yes," I said. "He's trying to force entry." The pounding stopped suddenly, replaced by an ominous silence. Then we heard the jingle of keys. "He has a spare key to my apartment." I realized with horror. "I gave it to him last year when I went out of town." Diego grabbed the kitchen table and dragged it against the door, just as we heard the key sliding into the lock. The deadbolt held, but the door handle turned, and the door strained against the table. "What the hell?" Marcus's voice was muffled but furious. "Move this shit!" The door shuddered as he threw his full weight against it. Marcus was 6'3" and built like the construction worker he was, strong enough to eventually break through if he kept at it. "Police are on their way." I called through the door, hoping to buy us time. "Fuck the police. This is family business, Kayla. You're making this worse for everyone." Mom had gone completely pale, staring at the door as if she couldn't believe the voice on the other side belonged to her son. Dad looked like he was watching his entire world collapse in real time. Tessa was the calmest person in the room, sitting on the couch with an expression of grim resignation. "This is what he does," she said quietly. "He escalates until everyone gives him what he wants, just to make it stop." The door shook again under another impact. Through the peephole, I could see Marcus backing up for another running start. His face was twisted with rage, his shirt torn, his knuckles already bloody from hitting the door. "He's going to break through," Diego said. "We need to get out of here." "The patio," I said, but even as I said it, I knew it was useless. The courtyard was enclosed, with only one exit that led right back to the front of the building where Marcus could easily intercept us. Another thunderous impact, and I heard wood splintering. The table was starting to slide across the floor despite Diego's efforts to hold it in place. Then, like a miracle, we heard the sound of sirens in the distance, growing closer. Marcus heard them too because the pounding stopped abruptly. Through the peephole, I watched him pace back and forth in the hallway, running his hands through his hair, trying to regain his composure. By the time the police knocked on my door 3 minutes later, Marcus had disappeared entirely. Officer Janet Martinez was about my age, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put Tessa at ease. Her partner, Officer David Chen, took one look at Tessa's injuries and immediately called for an ambulance despite her protests. "Ma'am, those ribs need to be x-rayed," he said firmly. "Internal bleeding from broken ribs can be fatal." While the paramedics examined Tessa, Officer Martinez took detailed statements from all of us. She photographed Tessa's injuries, documented the damage to my door, and took screenshots of Marcus's threatening text messages. "Has he ever been violent before?" she asked Tessa. "Yes, but not like this. Usually he's more controlled about it. He makes sure the bruises don't show, or he convinces me they were accidents." Mom made a small sound of distress at this revelation. The scope of Marcus's deception was becoming clear. He'd been systematically abusing his wife while maintaining his charming facade around the rest of us. "Why didn't you report it before?" Officer Martinez asked gently. Tessa looked at my parents before answering. "Because I knew no one would believe me. Marcus is well respected in this town. He coaches Little League Baseball. He volunteers at the food bank. Everyone thinks he's this great guy who just drinks a little too much sometimes." Dad's face crumpled at this. He'd been one of the people singing Marcus's praises, proud of how his eldest son had seemed to mature after getting married, settling down, becoming a pillar of the community. Officer Martinez nodded knowingly. "It's very common for abusers to maintain a positive public image. It's part of how they isolate their victims. Who's going to believe the crazy wife over the beloved community volunteer?" The ambulance arrived, and despite Tessa's continued protests, the paramedics insisted on transporting her to Riverside General Hospital for x-rays and a full medical evaluation. Officer Martinez accompanied her, explaining that having medical documentation of her injuries would be crucial if she decided to press charges. After they left, the apartment felt eerily quiet. The broken door frame and scattered furniture were evidence that the morning's events had really happened. But part of me still couldn't process that my brother, the same person who'd taught me to drive, who'd walked me down the aisle at my high school graduation when Dad was deployed overseas, had become this monster. Mom sat on my couch crying quietly while Dad paced the length of my small living room. Neither of them seemed to know what to say or do next. "Where do you think he went?" I asked Diego. "Probably home to destroy evidence. Or to a bar to establish an alibi. Guys like Marcus are usually smarter about this stuff than people give them credit for." My phone rang. The caller ID showed Tyler, my younger brother. "Kayla, what the hell is going on?" Marcus just showed up at my place asking if I'd seen Tessa. "He looks like he got in a fight, and he's acting weird even for him." I put the call on speakers so my parents could hear. "Tyler, listen to me carefully. Do not let Marcus into your apartment. He beat up Tessa this morning, and he's dangerous right now." Silence on the other end. Then Tyler's voice, lower and more serious. "Are you kidding me right now? She's at the hospital getting x-rays for broken ribs. The police are involved. This isn't a joke or a misunderstanding." Another pause. "Shit. Kayla, he's been drinking since he got here. He's talking about how family needs to stick together, how outsiders are trying to destroy us. He keeps saying Tessa is being dramatic and you're being manipulated. Get away from him, Tyler. Go stay with friends until this gets sorted out." He's my brother too, Kayla. Maybe I should try to talk to him, get him to turn himself in. No. The word came out harsher than I intended. Tyler, he tried to break down my door this morning. He threatened to kill his wife. This isn't the Marcus we grew up with. This is someone else entirely. I could hear muffled conversation in the background. Then Tyler came back on the line. He's leaving, says he needs to go home and think. Kayla, I'm scared. I've never seen him like this. After Tyler hung up, the four of us sat in uncomfortable silence. The reality of our situation was sinking in. Marcus was out there somewhere, angry and unpredictable, knowing that his carefully constructed life was about to implode. Dad cleared his throat. We need to think about what comes next. If Tessa presses charges, if this goes to trial, it's going to tear the family apart. Dad, I said carefully, the family is already torn apart. This didn't start this morning. This started the first time Marcus hit his wife, and it's been getting worse ever since. But maybe there's still time to fix it. Get him into treatment, anger management, AA. He could get help. I looked at my father and saw a man desperately trying to save his son from the consequences of his own actions. It was the same impulse that had led him to bail Marcus out of jail, to make excuses for his behavior, to enable his drinking for years. What about Tessa? I asked. What about her right to be safe in her own home? What about her right to live without fear? Mom looked up from her tissues. Of course we want Tessa to be safe. But destroying Marcus won't bring back the person she was before this happened. Maybe not, I said, but it might prevent him from destroying the next woman or the woman after that. The truth was hanging in the air between us, ugly and unavoidable. Marcus had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. There was no going back to family barbecues and holiday dinners where everyone pretended everything was fine. There was no returning to the comfortable fiction that Marcus was just a guy with a drinking problem who sometimes got a little too rough around the edges. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Tessa. Borrowed a phone at the hospital. 3 broken ribs, minor internal bleeding, concussion. They want to keep me overnight for observation. The social worker here says I can get an emergency restraining order. I think I want to do it. I showed the message to my parents. Mom closed her eyes as if she could make the words disappear. Dad sat down heavily, looking older than I'd ever seen him. If she gets a restraining order, he said slowly, Marcus won't be able to go home. He'll lose his job when this becomes public. Everything he's worked for will be gone. Good, I said again. Maybe next time he'll think twice before breaking someone's ribs. But even as I said it, I knew there wouldn't be a next time with Tessa. She was done. The question was what Marcus would do when he realized that his victim had finally found the strength to fight back. Diego squeezed my hand. You did the right thing calling the police. Probably saved her life. I nodded, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow, like something fundamental had been carved out of my chest. The brother I'd loved and looked up to was gone, replaced by a stranger who threatened women and kicked them when they were down. My phone rang again. This time it was Officer Martinez. Miss Brennan, we have a problem. Your brother turned himself in about an hour ago, but he's claiming self-defense. Says Tessa attacked him with a kitchen knife, and he was just trying to protect himself. He's got scratches on his arms that he says are from her nails. My stomach dropped. That's impossible. She could barely sit up when she got to my apartment. I know, and the medical evidence contradicts his story completely. But he's got a lawyer now, and they're spinning a narrative about a mentally unstable wife who's been threatening suicide, attacking her husband, making up stories for attention. People will believe that? Some will. Your brother has a good reputation in this community, and his lawyer is already talking to reporters about how domestic violence accusations are often fabricated during divorce proceedings. I looked around my destroyed apartment, at my parents sitting shell-shocked on my furniture, and realized that the real battle was just beginning. Marcus wasn't going to go quietly. He was going to fight this with everything he had, and he was going to try to destroy Tessa's credibility in the process. What can we do? Keep documenting everything. Save those text messages. If he contacts any of you, record it if possible. And Miss Brennan, be very careful. Men like your brother don't just give up when they're cornered. They escalate. After she hung up, I felt the weight of what we'd set in motion. By helping Tessa, by calling the police, by refusing to keep the family's secret, I'd started a war. And wars, even justified ones, leave casualties on both sides. But looking at the hospital bracelet in the photo Tessa had sent, seeing the medical documentation of what Marcus had done to her, I knew I'd made the right choice. Some secrets are too dangerous to keep. Some loyalties are too toxic to honor. My brother had chosen his path when he decided that his wife's body was his property to damage. Now he would have to live with the consequences, and so would the rest of us. 3 days after Marcus turned himself in, I was sitting in the waiting room of Patricia Rodriguez's law office, holding a manila folder thick with evidence that would either save Tessa's life or destroy what was left of my family. The office smelled like leather and strong coffee, the kind of place where serious decisions got made by people who understood that the law was less about justice and more about who could tell the most convincing story. Patricia Rodriguez was not what I'd expected from a family law attorney. She was younger than me, barely 30, with fierce dark eyes and a handshake that could crack walnuts. Her office walls were covered with certificates and photos of her with various community leaders. But it was the small framed picture on her desk that caught my attention. A woman with a black eye holding a young girl, both smiling despite the obvious pain. "That's my mother and me," Patricia said, noticing my gaze, taken the day after she finally left my father. She kept that picture to remind herself that leaving was possible, even when everything seemed hopeless. I opened the folder and spread its contents across her desk. Text messages, photographs of injuries, medical records, witness statements, audio recordings from my phone when Marcus was pounding on my door. 3 days of meticulous documentation that painted a picture of escalating violence and systematic abuse. Patricia reviewed each item with the focused attention of a surgeon, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. When she reached the hospital records showing Tessa's internal bleeding and concussion, her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This is solid," she said finally. "Better than most domestic violence cases I see. Usually we're working with incomplete medical records, conflicting witness testimony, he said, she said situations that come down to credibility battles. But Marcus has a lawyer now. He's claiming self-defense." Patricia leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "Robert Ashford. I know him. He's good at creating reasonable doubt, especially in cases involving local prominent figures. He'll paint your sister-in-law as an unstable woman who attacked her husband, then fabricated abuse allegations to cover her own violence. But the medical evidence can be explained away if you're creative enough. Internal bleeding from a fall down the stairs. Facial bruising from walking into a door during a struggle. Ashford will claim that Marcus was defending himself from a knife attack, that Tessa's injuries were either self-inflicted or accidental during the altercation. I felt my heart sink. So he's going to get away with it? Not if I have anything to say about it. Patricia's smile was sharp as a blade. "See, Ashford is making a crucial mistake. He's so focused on discrediting Tessa that he's forgotten about you." "What do you mean?" "You're not the victim here, Kayla. You're the witness. And you have no motive to lie about what happened. You're his sister. If anything, family loyalty would incline you to protect him, not destroy him. When a family member testifies against their own blood, juries pay attention." Over the next hour, Patricia outlined her strategy. Rather than focusing solely on the night of the attack, she wanted to build a comprehensive case showing Marcus's pattern of escalating violence. She had me walk through every incident I could remember. The unexplained bruises on Tessa at family gatherings, the times I'd heard raised voices through the walls when visiting their house, the gradual change in Tessa's personality from confident and outgoing to nervous and withdrawn. "We're going to demonstrate that this wasn't a one-time incident of mutual combat," Patricia explained. "This was the culmination of a sustained campaign of domestic terrorism designed to break your sister-in-law's spirit and isolate her from anyone who might help her." I left her office feeling something I hadn't experienced since this whole nightmare began: hope. Not just hope that Tessa would be safe, but hope that Marcus would finally face real consequences for his actions. That afternoon, I drove to the hospital to visit Tessa. She was being discharged the next day, but had nowhere to go. The restraining order meant she couldn't return to the house she'd shared with Marcus, and her family lived 3 states away. She'd been staying with friends, but the constant moving around was taking its toll on her recovery. I found her sitting by the window in her hospital room, staring out at the parking lot with vacant eyes. The bruises on her face had darkened to deep purples and yellows, making her look like a watercolor painting left in the rain. She'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, and her clothes hung loosely on her diminished frame. "How are you feeling?" I asked, though the question seemed inadequate given the circumstances. "Like I've been hit by a truck," she said with a weak attempt at humor. "The social worker here has been amazing, though. She's helping me figure out the next steps. Temporary housing, counseling, legal aid. I never realized how many resources existed for women in my situation." "Good. You shouldn't have to navigate this alone." Tessa turned from the window to look at me directly. "Kayla, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course. Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" "Pressing charges, getting the restraining order, all of it. Because everyone keeps telling me how brave I am, but I don't feel brave. I feel terrified and guilty, and like I'm destroying everything good in Marcus's life." The question hit me like a physical blow. Even after everything Marcus had done to her, Tessa was still worried about protecting him from the consequences of his own actions. The psychological damage he'd inflicted went so much deeper than broken ribs and split lips. "Tessa," I said carefully, "what good things in Marcus's life are you destroying? His job, his reputation, his relationship with his family, his—" "Stop." I pulled a chair closer to her bed and sat down. "Let me ask you something. Did Marcus worry about destroying your job when his violence made you miss work because you couldn't hide the bruises? Did he worry about your reputation when he isolated you from your friends? Did he worry about your relationships when he made you too ashamed to see your own family?" She was quiet, staring at her hands folded in her lap. "The things you're worried about destroying," I continued, "those aren't good things he earned through kindness or hard work. Those are privileges he maintained by hiding his true nature. Your silence was the foundation everything else was built on." Tears started flowing down her cheeks, but she didn't try to wipe them away. "I loved him, Kayla. I really did. For a long time, I thought I could love him enough to fix whatever was broken in him. I know. And that's not your fault. That's what people like Marcus count on, that the people who love them will keep trying to save them, even as they're being destroyed in the process." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the afternoon light shift across the hospital room walls. Finally, Tessa spoke again. The social worker showed me statistics about domestic violence escalation. She said that once an abuser breaks bones, the likelihood of them eventually committing murder increases by something like 700%. The number hung in the air between us like a death sentence. She said I'm probably not the first woman Marcus has hurt, and I definitely won't be the last unless someone stops him. "Do you believe that?" Tessa nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about his ex-fiancée, Amanda. She broke up with him right before we started dating, and he always said she was crazy, that she made up stories about him because she couldn't handle being dumped. But what if she wasn't crazy? What if she was just the first one brave enough to get away?" I felt a chill run down my spine. I remembered Amanda, a quiet, artistic woman who'd seemed perfect for Marcus until she suddenly disappeared from his life. Marcus had been devastated, claiming she'd cheated on him with her art teacher, but now I wondered if the truth was something much darker. "We could try to find her," I suggested. "If she's willing to testify about her experiences with Marcus, it would help establish the pattern Patricia was talking about." "You'd do that? Even though it means digging up more dirt on your own brother?" "Tessa, Marcus stopped being my brother the night he broke your ribs. The person I grew up with, the person I loved and respected, that person wouldn't hurt someone smaller and weaker than him. That person wouldn't threaten to kill a woman for asking for help." When I left the hospital that evening, I had a new mission. I drove straight to the Riverside Public Library and settled in at one of the computers with internet access. Finding people in the digital age was easier than it should be, and within an hour I had located Amanda Chen, Marcus's ex-fiancée, living in Portland and working as a graphic designer. I stared at her Facebook profile picture for a long time before deciding to send a message. How do you reach out to someone you barely knew to ask if your brother had abused them? How do you explain that you're trying to build a case against someone you once loved? In the end, I kept it simple. Hi Amanda, this is Kayla Brennan, Marcus's sister. I know this is out of the blue, but I'm hoping you might be willing to talk to me about your relationship with him. Something has happened, and I think your perspective might be important. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then drove home to wait. The response came faster than I'd expected. Amanda called me directly, her voice cautious but not unfriendly. Kayla, I was wondering when someone from Marcus's family would reach out. I saw the news about his arrest. It made the news? Local paper ran a story yesterday. Local construction supervisor charged with domestic violence. They didn't use names, but anyone who knows Marcus could figure it out from the details. My stomach sank. I hadn't considered how public this would become. How the entire community would be watching and judging every move we made. Amanda, I need to ask you something, and I'll understand if you don't want to answer. Did Marcus ever hurt you? Physically, I mean. The pause stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Amanda spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes. That single word confirmed my worst fears and gave me the ammunition Patricia needed to destroy Marcus's self-defense claim. How often? It started small. A shove here, a grabbed wrist there. He was always sorry afterward, always had an explanation. Work stress, family pressure, too much to drink. I made excuses for him because I thought that's what love looked like, accepting someone's flaws and helping them be better. When did you realize it wasn't going to get better? The night he put me in the emergency room. I told people I fell down the stairs because I was embarrassed to admit that the man who claimed to love me had thrown me against a wall hard enough to give me a concussion. I closed my eyes, picturing Marcus's hands on this gentle woman, seeing the pattern that had repeated itself with Tessa. Why didn't you press charges? Same reason most women don't. I was afraid no one would believe me. Marcus was so charming, so well-liked. He coached Little League, remember? He helped old ladies with their groceries. Who was going to believe that Mr. Community Service was beating up his girlfriend? But you left him. I ran. In the middle of the night while he was passed out drunk. I packed one suitcase and drove straight to Portland. I was so terrified he'd come after me that I changed my name, got a new phone number, closed all my social media accounts. For 2 years, I looked over my shoulder every time I left my apartment. Amanda, would you be willing to testify about what he did to you? Another long pause. If it would help protect his current wife, yes. No woman should have to go through what I went through. And Kayla? I'm sorry it took something this extreme for someone in your family to believe a woman about Marcus's violence. That night, I called Patricia and told her about Amanda's testimony. I could hear the satisfaction in the lawyer's voice as she absorbed this new information. This changes everything, Patricia said. With Amanda's testimony, we can establish a clear pattern of escalating domestic violence spanning multiple relationships. Ashford's self-defense claim becomes much harder to sell when we can demonstrate that Marcus has a history of putting women in the hospital. What happens next? Next, we start building a case that will ensure Marcus never puts his hands on another woman again. Over the following days, I threw myself into investigation mode with the intensity of someone whose life depended on the outcome. I contacted every mutual friend Marcus and Amanda had shared, every coworker who might have witnessed his temper, every neighbor who might have heard the fights. What I discovered was a trail of red flags that stretched back years. Marcus's drinking buddies admitted he often bragged about keeping his women in line. His former boss at the construction company revealed that Marcus had been fired not just for showing up drunk, but for making threatening comments about his female supervisor. Neighbors from the apartment complex where he'd lived with Amanda confirmed they'd called the police multiple times for noise complaints that sounded like domestic disputes. The picture that emerged was of a man who saw violence as a legitimate tool for maintaining control over the women in his life. This wasn't about anger management or alcohol abuse. This was about power and entitlement, about a fundamental belief that women existed to serve his needs and deserved punishment when they failed to comply. I documented everything in a growing file that I kept in my car, afraid to leave it at home where Marcus might somehow gain access to it. The restraining order was supposed to keep him away from me, But I didn't trust a piece of paper to stop someone who had already demonstrated his willingness to break down doors and terrorize his own family. My paranoia proved justified when I returned home from work one evening to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing was missing, but someone had clearly been inside. Furniture had been moved slightly, drawers were not quite closed all the way, and there was a faint smell of Marcus's cologne lingering in the air. I called Diego immediately, then the police. Officer Martinez arrived within 10 minutes, but without proof of forced entry or evidence of theft, there wasn't much she could do. "He's testing boundaries," she explained as we walked through my violated apartment. "Seeing what he can get away with, trying to intimidate you into backing down. It's textbook behavior for domestic abusers when their control starts slipping. What should I do? Document everything. Change your locks. Consider staying somewhere else until this goes to trial. And Kayla, be very careful. Your testimony is probably the most dangerous thing to his defense strategy. If he can silence you, he has a much better chance of convincing a jury that this was all a misunderstanding between husband and wife." That night, I stayed at Diego's apartment, but I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. Every car door in the parking lot made my heart race. Marcus had invaded my sense of safety in my own home, and I understood for the first time how Tessa must have felt living with that constant fear. The next morning, I called Patricia and told her about the break-in. Her response was immediate and decisive. "We're accelerating the timeline. I'm filing for an emergency hearing to revoke Marcus's bail. This kind of intimidation can't be tolerated." "Will that work?" "It should. Violating a restraining order is grounds for immediate incarceration, and what he did last night definitely qualifies as violation, even if we can't prove it definitively." That afternoon, Patricia and I sat in Judge Ellen Morrison's courtroom as she reviewed the evidence of Marcus's intimidation campaign. Robert Ashford argued that there was no proof his client had been anywhere near my apartment, that the break-in could have been anyone. Judge Morrison was a stern woman in her 60s, who had clearly seen every excuse and manipulation tactic in the book. She listened to Ashford's arguments with the patience of someone waiting for a child to finish a tantrum. "Mr. Ashford," she said finally, "your client is accused of systematic domestic violence against his wife. Now his sister, who is a key witness in this case, reports evidence of intimidation and unlawful entry into her home. Whether we can prove your client was personally responsible is less important than ensuring that all witnesses in this case can testify without fear of retaliation." She brought down her gavel with decisive force. "Bail is revoked. The defendant will remain in custody until trial." I watched through the courtroom windows as Marcus was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we might actually win. But I knew the real battle was still ahead. In 2 weeks, I would have to sit in a witness stand and tell a room full of strangers about the night my brother tried to kill his wife. I would have to look him in the eye and choose justice over family loyalty. As I walked out of the courthouse into the Oregon sunshine, I realized I was no longer the same person who had opened her apartment door to a broken woman at 4 in the morning. I had become someone willing to burn bridges to light the way to truth. The Clackamas County Courthouse smelled like floor wax and nervous sweat on the morning of Marcus's trial. I sat in the back row of the gallery, watching potential jurors file in with the kind of detached curiosity you might have for strangers at a bus stop. These 12 people would decide whether my brother spent the next few years in prison or walked free to continue his pattern of violence against women. Patricia had warned me that jury selection would be crucial. Robert Ashford would try to seat jurors who believed in traditional family values, who might be sympathetic to a man they'd perceive as being railroaded by vindictive women. She would counter by looking for people who understood that domestic violence crossed all social and economic boundaries. I watched Ashford work the room during voir dire, his silver hair and expensive suit lending him an air of distinguished authority. He was everything a jury expected a defense attorney to be: confident, articulate, slightly paternal. When he spoke about the sacred bond of marriage and how outsiders often misunderstood the dynamics between husband and wife, several potential jurors nodded along. Patricia was different. Younger, more direct, less concerned with being likable than with being truthful. She asked harder questions about domestic violence, about whether jurors could convict a man who seemed respectable on the surface if the evidence showed he was violent in private. Have any of you ever known someone who presented differently in public than they did behind closed doors? She asked. Nearly every hand in the jury box went up. By lunch, they had their jury, 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from mid-20s to early 60s. The composition felt promising, but Patricia cautioned me against reading too much into demographics. Some of my biggest surprises have come from jurors I thought would be automatic votes one way or the other, she said as we grabbed sandwiches from the courthouse cafeteria. What matters is whether they can follow the evidence where it leads, even if it's uncomfortable. The afternoon brought opening statements. Ashford went first, painting a picture of a troubled marriage between 2 people who'd grown apart. Marcus was a hard-working man dealing with financial stress, and his wife's increasingly erratic behavior. The night in question was a tragic culmination of mounting tensions, with Tessa attacking Marcus in a fit of rage and Marcus defending himself with minimal necessary force. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ashford said, making eye contact with each juror, "this is not a case about domestic violence. This is a case about a marriage that ended in mutual combat, with both parties bearing responsibility for the violence that occurred." When Patricia stood for her opening, the energy in the courtroom shifted. She spoke quietly at first, forcing the jury to lean forward and listen. "Over the next few days, you're going to hear testimony from multiple women about Marcus Brennan's pattern of escalating violence. You'll see medical evidence of injuries that could not have been caused by self-defense. You'll hear recordings of threats, see photographs of damage, and witness testimony from family members who watched this defendant terrorize his wife." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "The defense wants you to believe this was mutual combat. But mutual combat suggests equality of force, equality of choice, when a 200-pound man breaks the ribs of a 120-pound woman. When he threatens to kill her if she tells anyone about his violence, there is no equality. There is only predator and prey." The first witness was Dr. James Kim from Riverside General Hospital. He walked the jury through Tessa's injuries with clinical precision, explaining how the pattern of fractures indicated multiple impacts from a blunt object, most likely boots or fists. The internal bleeding was consistent with severe abdominal trauma, the kind that could be fatal if untreated. Ashford's cross-examination focused on the possibility that Tessa's injuries could have occurred during a struggle, perhaps when Marcus was trying to defend himself from a knife attack. Dr. Kim remained unflappable, explaining that defensive wounds on Tessa's hands and arms were inconsistent with someone wielding a weapon. "Doctor," Ashford said, "isn't it true that domestic disputes often result in injuries to both parties?" "In my experience, Mr. Ashford, true mutual combat results in injuries to both participants. Mr. Brennan had only minor scratches on his forearms. Mrs. Brennan had life-threatening internal injuries. That disparity speaks for itself." The second day brought Amanda Chen to the witness stand. She'd flown in from Portland, looking professional but fragile in a navy blue suit that couldn't quite hide her nervousness. Patricia guided her through her relationship with Marcus, starting with the romantic courtship and gradually revealing the escalating pattern of control and violence. "He started by isolating me from my friends," Amanda testified. "He'd find fault with everyone I spent time with, convince me they were jealous of our relationship or trying to turn me against him. Eventually, it was easier to just stop seeing them than to deal with his reactions." "Did the isolation extend to your family?" "Yes. He claimed my parents didn't respect him, that they were trying to break us up. He made visits home so unpleasant that I eventually stopped going. He convinced me that he was the only person who truly understood me, who really cared about my well-being." Patricia asked about the first time Marcus had hit her. Amanda's voice grew smaller as she described what she'd initially dismissed as a moment of frustration, a push that sent her stumbling into a wall. "He was immediately apologetic," she said. "He cried, begged my forgiveness, promised it would never happen again. He blamed it on work stress and his father's drinking problem. I believed him because I wanted to believe him." "How long between the first incident and the second?" "About 3 months. But after that, the incidents became more frequent and more severe. By the end of our relationship, I was being hit or pushed at least once a week." Ashford's cross-examination was brutal. He suggested that Amanda was lying to get attention, that she'd fabricated the abuse allegations after Marcus broke up with her. He implied that her move to Portland and name change were evidence of mental instability rather than fear. Isn't it true, Miss Chen, that you were hospitalized for depression following your breakup with Mr. Brennan? I was hospitalized after Mr. Brennan threw me against a wall hard enough to give me a concussion, Amanda replied firmly. The depression was a result of months of psychological abuse designed to make me question my own sanity. But you never filed a police report about this alleged assault. No, I didn't. I was ashamed and scared, and I didn't think anyone would believe me. That's exactly what domestic abusers count on: their victims, shame, and isolation. I could see some of the jurors reacting sympathetically to Amanda's testimony, but others looked skeptical. The he-said-she-said nature of domestic violence cases made them inherently difficult to prosecute, especially when the defendant had a clean public record. The third day was when I took the stand. Patricia had prepared me extensively, but nothing could have readied me for the experience of sitting in that witness box with Marcus staring at me from the defendant's table. He looked different in his jail jumpsuit, smaller somehow, more ordinary. The commanding presence that had dominated every family gathering was gone, replaced by something that looked almost pathetic. Patricia walked me through the events of that morning, starting with Tessa's arrival at my apartment. I described her injuries in detail, her fear, her desperate need for safety. I told the jury about Marcus's text messages, his attempt to break down my door, the terror in my apartment as we waited for police to arrive. Kayla, Patricia said, what was your relationship with your brother before this incident? I loved him. I looked up to him. He was my big brother who taught me to drive, who walked me down the aisle at my high school graduation. I would have done anything for him. And how do you feel about testifying against him today? I looked directly at Marcus before answering. It's the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But my brother stopped being the person I loved the night he broke his wife's ribs and threatened to kill her. The man sitting at that table is a stranger who happens to share my DNA. Ashford's cross-examination was designed to paint me as a jealous sister who'd never liked Tessa, and was using this situation to drive a wedge in Marcus's marriage. He suggested that I'd coached Tessa on what to say, that I'd fabricated evidence to support her story. Isn't it true, Miss Brennan, that you've always resented your brother's success? No, that's not true. Isn't it true that you blamed Marcus for your parents' preference for him? My parents' favoritism toward Marcus is exactly why he never learned to face consequences for his actions. They enabled his behavior for years, and I was part of that enabling until I saw what it led to. So you admit you have issues with your family's treatment of your brother? I have issues with my family's willingness to overlook violence against women as long as it's committed by someone they love. The fourth day brought Tessa to the witness stand. She'd gained some weight since the hospital, but she still looked fragile in her conservative gray dress. Her voice was steady as Patricia guided her through the history of her marriage, the gradual escalation of Marcus's controlling behavior, the increasing frequency and severity of his violence. Mrs. Brennan, Patricia said, why didn't you leave your husband sooner? Because he made me believe I deserved what was happening to me. He convinced me that I was clumsy, stupid, ungrateful. He said I was lucky he put up with me because no other man would want damaged goods. Did you ever consider calling the police? Many times, but Marcus was well respected in the community. He coached Little League, volunteered at the church, helped neighbors with their home repairs. I knew that if it came down to his word against mine, people would believe him. What changed on the night you went to Kayla's apartment? Tessa took a deep breath before answering. He told me he was going to kill me. Not in anger, not as a threat. As a matter-of-fact statement about his plans. He said he'd already figured out how to make it look like an accident, and that everyone would believe poor Marcus had lost his wife to her own clumsiness. How did that make you feel? Terrified, but also clear. I realized that staying meant dying, and I wasn't ready to die. Ashford's cross-examination focused on inconsistencies in Tessa's story, moments where her memory was unclear about exact times or specific conversations. He suggested that her injuries could have been caused by falling downstairs during an argument, that she'd invented the death threats to gain sympathy. Mrs. Brennan, isn't it true that you've been seeing a therapist for depression and anxiety? Yes. And isn't it true that depression can sometimes cause people to misinterpret situations, to see threats where none exist? I didn't misinterpret my broken ribs, Mr. Ashford. I didn't imagine the blood in my mouth or the pain in my chest when I tried to breathe. The prosecution rested after 4 days of testimony. Patricia had built a comprehensive case, showing Marcus's pattern of escalating violence across multiple relationships, the severity of Tessa's injuries, and the credible fear that had driven her to seek help. Ashford's defense strategy became clear on the 5th day. He called character witnesses, Marcus's Little League players, church members, co-workers who testified to his kindness and community involvement. He painted a picture of a man beloved by everyone who knew him, someone incapable of the calculated violence described by the prosecution. Marcus himself took the stand on the 6th day. He was a compelling witness, speaking earnestly about his love for his wife and his shock at being accused of domestic violence. He admitted to drinking too much sometimes, to occasional arguments with Tessa, but denied ever intentionally hurting her. That night, he testified, Tessa came at me with a kitchen knife. She'd been acting strange for weeks, talking about people following her, paranoid thoughts that scared me. I tried to calm her down, but she attacked me. I defended myself, trying to get the knife away from her. She fell during the struggle and hit the counter. At what point did you realize she was seriously injured? Not until the next morning when I woke up and she was gone. I thought she'd just gone to stay with a friend to cool off. I had no idea she was hurt badly enough to need hospitalization. Patricia's cross-examination was surgical in its precision. She walked Marcus through his previous relationships, forcing him to admit to disagreements that had resulted in women being injured. She showed him photographs of Tessa's injuries, asking him to explain how a fall against a counter could cause the specific pattern of damage documented by the doctors. Mr. Brennan, you testified that your wife attacked you with a knife. Where is this knife? I don't know. It must have gotten lost during the struggle. No knife was found at the scene, Mr. Brennan. The police searched your house thoroughly. Marcus looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, his face gaunt from 2 weeks in county jail. The confident man who had once dominated every family gathering was gone, replaced by someone who kept his eyes fixed on the defense table, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Patricia had prepared victim impact statements from both Tessa and Amanda. Tessa chose to deliver hers in person, walking to the podium with steady steps that would have been impossible months earlier. Your Honor, she began, her voice clear and strong. Marcus Brennan stole 2 years of my life. He made me believe I was worthless, that I deserved violence, that no one would ever believe me if I spoke the truth about what was happening in our home. She paused, looking directly at Marcus for the first time since the trial began. But he didn't just steal those years from me. He stole them from every woman who will encounter him in the future. The patterns of domestic violence don't disappear with time or good intentions. They escalate. The next woman might not be as fortunate as I was to have someone like Kayla willing to risk everything to help her. Marcus flinched visibly at the mention of my name, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of his sister's betrayal was finally settling on him. I ask this court to impose a sentence that reflects not just the harm Marcus has already caused, but the harm he will cause if he's given the opportunity. Prison is not just punishment, it's protection for women who don't even know they need protecting yet. Amanda's statement was read by Patricia, as she was unable to travel from Portland for the hearing. Her words were equally powerful, describing the years of therapy needed to rebuild her sense of self-worth, the ongoing anxiety that made relationships difficult, the way Marcus's violence had shaped her life long after she'd escaped it. When Judge Morrison asked if Marcus had anything to say before sentencing, he stood slowly, his legs seeming unsteady beneath him. Your Honor, I want to apologize to Tessa, to Amanda, to my family. I know saying sorry doesn't undo the harm I've caused, but I need them to know that I never intended for things to go as far as they did. His voice broke slightly, but Judge Morrison's expression remained impassive. She had heard similar apologies from countless defendants over the years, and she knew the difference between genuine remorse and self-pity. I've been thinking a lot during these past weeks, Marcus continued, about the man I became and how different he was from the man I wanted to be. I know I have a drinking problem. I know I have anger issues. I'm willing to get help, to do whatever it takes to make sure this never happens again. Judge Morrison let him finish, then delivered her sentence with the measured cadence of someone who had considered every word carefully. Mr. Brennan, the court has reviewed your case thoroughly, including the probation department's report and the victim impact statements. The evidence presented at trial shows a pattern of escalating domestic violence spanning multiple relationships and several years. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment or a single incident of mutual combat, as your defense suggested. This was systematic terrorism directed at women who trusted you. She paused, letting her words settle in the quiet courtroom. The court sentences you to 8 years in the Oregon Department of Corrections, with the possibility of supervised release after serving a minimum of 6 years. You will be required to complete a certified batterer intervention program and undergo regular psychological evaluation. Upon release, you will be prohibited from contacting any of the victims in this case, and any future relationships must be disclosed to your parole officer. 8 years. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus sagged visibly, his lawyer placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. From my seat in the gallery, I watched my brother absorb the reality that his life as he had known it was over. My parents sat in the front row, Mom crying quietly into Dad's shoulder. They had aged visibly during the trial, the stress of watching their eldest son's public disgrace taking its toll on their health and their marriage. The family they had worked so hard to protect had been destroyed anyway, not by outside forces but by the very person they had spent years enabling. After the sentencing, the courtroom cleared slowly. Reporters waited outside, but most of the major media attention had moved on to other stories. Local domestic violence was only newsworthy for so long, unless there was a particularly sensational element to keep audiences engaged. Tessa approached me in the hallway outside the courtroom. She looked different than she had during the trial. Stronger, more confident, like someone who had finally stopped apologizing for existing. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything. For believing me when I showed up at your door. For risking your relationship with your family. For testifying even when it meant destroying your brother." I hugged her, this woman who had become more of a sister to me than Zania had ever been in my childhood memories of the original story inspiration. That felt wrong. I caught myself mixing up narratives. Tessa had become important to me in a way that transcended our legal connection through Marcus. "You don't need to thank me," I said. "You saved yourself. I just helped you find a safe place to land." She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since that terrible morning months ago. "I'm moving back to Colorado next month," she said. "My sister lives there, and I got accepted into a graduate program at University of Denver. Social work, with a focus on domestic violence counseling. That's perfect for you. I want to help other women who are where I was. Women who think they can't leave, who think no one will believe them, who think they deserve what's happening to them." We exchanged contact information and promised to stay in touch. As she walked away, I realized I was watching someone who had transformed her trauma into purpose, her victimization into advocacy. It was a kind of alchemy that gave meaning to suffering without excusing the people who had caused it. My parents were waiting by their car in the courthouse parking lot. The conversation we needed to have had been postponed through months of legal proceedings, but it could no longer be avoided. "Kayla," Dad said as I approached, "we need to talk." "I know." We found a quiet corner of the parking lot, away from the reporters and curious onlookers. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The weight of everything that had happened, everything that had been revealed, hung between us like smoke. "I keep thinking about what I missed," Mom said finally. "All those times Tessa seemed quiet at family dinners, all those long sleeves in summer, all those excuses about being clumsy. How did I not see it?" "Because you didn't want to see it," I said, more gently than she probably deserved. "Because seeing it would have meant acknowledging that the son you were so proud of was capable of something monstrous." Dad's jaw tightened. "That's not fair, Kayla. We couldn't have known." "You could have known if you'd been paying attention," I interrupted. "Amanda tried to tell you what Marcus was like. His ex-girlfriend before her tried to tell you. But every time a woman had a problem with Marcus, you assumed she was the problem. We raised him better than that," Mom whispered. "We taught him to respect women, to be gentle, to use his words instead of his fists. You also taught him that he was special, that rules didn't apply to him the same way they applied to other people. You bailed him out of trouble so many times that he never learned actions have consequences. The truth was harsh but necessary. My parents had created the conditions that allowed Marcus to become an abuser through years of enabling behavior disguised as unconditional love. So what now? Dad asked. Do we just pretend we don't have a son? Do we abandon him in prison like everyone else has abandoned him? You support him if you want to, I said. But don't expect me to pretend that what happened was anything other than what it was. Don't expect me to visit him or write him letters or treat this like a misunderstanding that will blow over. He's still your brother. No, he's not. The brother I loved wouldn't have broken his wife's ribs. The brother I looked up to wouldn't have threatened to kill a woman for asking for help. That person either never existed or he died somewhere along the way, killed by alcohol and entitlement and the belief that women exist for his convenience. Mom started crying harder, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. She was grieving the loss of an illusion, while Tessa and Amanda were still healing from very real trauma. I'm not saying you can't have a relationship with Marcus, I continued. But I am saying that if you choose to maintain one, it can't be at the expense of acknowledging what he did. And it can't involve me. We parted ways in that parking lot with an understanding that our family would never be the same. The bonds that had held us together had been revealed as conditional, dependent on shared denial rather than genuine love. 6 months later, I was working at a new physical therapy clinic that specialized in treating domestic violence survivors. The work was emotionally demanding but deeply satisfying. I helped women rebuild not just their physical strength but their confidence in their bodies, as things that belonged to them, not to the men who had hurt them. Diego and I had grown closer through the trial and its aftermath. He had seen me at my worst and most vulnerable, and instead of being frightened away, he had chosen to stay and help me rebuild. We were talking about moving in together, about building something permanent from the wreckage of everything I had lost. One evening after work, I stopped by the grocery store near my apartment to pick up ingredients for dinner. The store was mostly empty, the fluorescent lights humming overhead as I navigated the produce section. I was comparing apples when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Kayla? I turned to find Tyler, my younger brother, standing with a grocery basket in his hands. He looked older, more serious than I remembered. The easy smile that had defined him in college was gone, replaced by something more guarded. Hey, I said, suddenly feeling awkward in a way I never had with Tyler before. How are you doing? Okay, I guess. Still figuring out how to navigate all this. Have you talked to Mom and Dad lately? They visit Marcus every few weeks. They keep trying to get me to go with them, but I can't. Not yet, maybe not ever. I felt a surge of relief that at least one member of my family understood the gravity of what Marcus had done. How is he? Tyler shrugged. According to them, he's doing well in prison. Sober for the first time in years, going to counseling, working in the library. They think he's finally getting his life together. And what do you think? I think 8 years might not be long enough for him to figure out why what he did was wrong, not just why he got caught. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two siblings trying to figure out how to be a family after everything that had defined their original family had been exposed as false. I saw Tessa on the news last week, Tyler said. She was speaking at some conference about domestic violence prevention. She looked good, strong. She is strong. Stronger than any of us gave her credit for. Do you ever regret it? Testifying, I mean. The question hung in the air between us. It was one I had asked myself countless times during sleepless nights, wondering if there had been another way to handle the situation that wouldn't have destroyed everything. No, I said finally. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that we created a family culture where Marcus thought he could get away with hurting women. But I don't regret speaking the truth. Tyler nodded slowly. I've been thinking about going to therapy. To talk through all this family stuff, figure out how to make sure I don't repeat Dad's mistakes. That's a good idea. I've been going too. It helps. We exchanged phone numbers and made tentative plans to have coffee the following week. As I watched Tyler walk away, I realized that some relationships could survive the truth, while others could only exist in its absence. A year after the sentencing, I received an unexpected phone call. The caller ID showed Patricia Rodriguez, though I couldn't imagine why my former attorney would be contacting me. "Kayla, I hope you don't mind me calling out of the blue like this. I have some news I thought you'd want to hear." "What kind of news?" "Marcus is being charged with additional crimes. 3 more women have come forward with allegations of domestic violence from relationships that predate his marriage to Tessa. Apparently, your testimony and the media coverage gave them the courage to speak up about what happened to them. The information hit me like a physical blow. 3 more women. 3 more victims who had suffered in silence while Marcus maintained his facade of respectability." "How far back do these allegations go?" "The earliest is from 2015, when Marcus was in college. A girlfriend who says he put her in the hospital twice, both times convincing her to lie to doctors about how she got injured." I thought about the Marcus I had known in 2015, the charming college athlete who came home for holidays with stories about his success and his bright future. Even then, he had been destroying women's lives in private while playing the role of golden boy in public. Are they credible allegations? Very credible. These women have medical records, witness statements, documentation. The prosecutor thinks they have enough evidence to file additional charges that could extend Marcus's sentence significantly. After Patricia hung up, I sat in my car outside the clinic where I worked, trying to process this new information. Part of me felt vindicated. The pattern of abuse was even more extensive than we had proven at trial, which meant my decision to testify had been absolutely necessary. But another part of me felt overwhelmed by the scope of Marcus's damage, the number of women whose lives he had touched with violence. That evening I called Tessa to let her know about the new charges. She was quiet for a long time after I finished explaining what Patricia had told me. "I knew there had to be others," she said finally. "Men like Marcus don't just become abusers overnight. They practice on women who they think won't be believed, who won't fight back, who won't have the resources to seek justice." "How does it make you feel, knowing you weren't the first?" "Sad for those women, but also grateful that our case gave them a pathway to speak their truth. Sometimes it takes one person's courage to create space for others to find their own." 2 years after Marcus's original sentencing, he was convicted on the additional charges and sentenced to another 6 years in prison. The local newspaper ran a follow-up story about the case, noting that 4 women's testimonies had painted a picture of a serial domestic abuser who had operated with impunity for nearly a decade. I didn't attend the second sentencing hearing. I had said everything I needed to say about Marcus during the original trial, and I had no interest in watching him perform remorse for a new audience. Instead, I spent that day working with clients at the clinic, helping women rebuild their strength after trauma. One of my clients that day was a woman named Sarah, whose ex-husband had broken her collarbone during their divorce proceedings. She was making remarkable progress, both physically and emotionally, but she still struggled with guilt about the effect her decision to leave had on their children. "I keep wondering if I did the right thing," she said as I guided her through range of motion exercises. "The kids are angry with me for breaking up the family. They think I should have tried harder to make things work." "How old are your children?" I asked. 15 and 13. Old enough to remember when their father seemed like a good man. Too young to understand that good men don't break their wives' bones. I thought about my own parents, still visiting Marcus in prison, still hoping he would somehow return to being the son they remembered from his childhood. The capacity for denial in the face of overwhelming evidence was one of humanity's most persistent traits. "Sarah, what would you tell your children if their future spouses treated them the way your ex-husband treated you?" "I'd tell them to run. I'd tell them they deserved better." "Then you did the right thing. You showed them that abuse isn't acceptable, even when it comes from someone you love. That's a lesson that might not make sense to them now, but it could save their lives someday." 3 years after the original trial, I received a letter forwarded through Patricia's office. The return address showed it was from the Oregon Department of Corrections from Marcus. I stared at the envelope for a long time before deciding to open it. The letter was handwritten on lined prison stationery, Marcus's familiar script filling 3 pages with words I had never expected to read from him. "Kayla," it began, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand if you throw this letter away without reading it. But I need to try to explain some things. Not to make excuses for what I did, but to help you understand that the person who hurt Tessa and Amanda and the others wasn't the brother you grew up loving. I've been sober for 3 years now, and I've been working with counselors who specialize in domestic violence. For the first time in my adult life, I can think clearly about my actions and their consequences. What I see horrifies me. I was a coward who took out my frustrations on women who trusted me. I convinced myself that I was the victim of stress, of alcohol, of circumstances beyond my control. But the truth is that I chose violence because it made me feel powerful when everything else in my life felt chaotic. I know I can never undo the harm I caused. I know I can never give Tessa back the years I stole from her, or erase Amanda's nightmares, or repair the family I destroyed with my actions. But I want you to know that I understand now why you testified against me. You saved lives, probably including mine. If I had continued on the path I was on, I would have eventually killed someone. The counselors here tell me that domestic violence almost always escalates until something stops it, either intervention or death. You chose intervention, and I will be grateful for that courage for the rest of my life. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't expect a relationship when I get out of prison. I just wanted you to know that the brother you loved is still in here somewhere, buried under years of anger and alcohol and entitlement. He's ashamed of what the other version of himself became, and he's working every day to make sure that version never hurts anyone again. I hope you're happy, Kayla. I hope you've built a good life from the wreckage I created. You deserve every good thing that comes to you. Your brother, Marcus. I read the letter 3 times before folding it and putting it in my desk drawer. I didn't respond, and I didn't plan to. Some apologies, no matter how sincere, come too late to bridge the damage they're meant to address. But I was glad he had written it, glad to know that somewhere in that prison cell was a person capable of genuine remorse and honest self-reflection. It didn't change what he had done, and it didn't repair our relationship, but it suggested that the violence might actually stop with him. 5 years after the trial, I married Diego in a small ceremony attended by friends, colleagues, and Tyler. My parents were not invited, not out of cruelty but out of necessity. They had never fully accepted responsibility for their role in enabling Marcus's behavior, and I couldn't build a new life on a foundation that included people who continued to make excuses for domestic violence. Tessa flew in from Colorado for the wedding. She had completed her master's degree in social work and was running a non-profit organization that provided legal advocacy for domestic violence survivors. She looked radiant in a blue dress that showed off arms, finally free of long sleeves worn to hide bruises. "You look happy," she said as we posed for photos after the ceremony. "I am happy. It took a while to learn how to be, but I think I've figured it out." What's the secret? Building relationships based on truth instead of convenience. Choosing people who see your worth, instead of people who need you to be smaller so they can feel bigger. Diego appeared beside us, handsome in his rented tuxedo, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. "Are you two solving the world's problems over here?" "Just the personal ones," Tessa said with a laugh. "The world's problems will have to wait until after your honeymoon." That night, as Diego and I danced to our favorite song in a room full of people who genuinely loved and supported us, I thought about the woman I had been 5 years earlier. That Kayla had believed that family loyalty meant protecting people from the consequences of their actions, that love meant accepting unacceptable behavior, that speaking the truth was a betrayal rather than an act of courage. This Kayla knew better. This Kayla had learned that real love sometimes requires breaking things that look beautiful but are built on rotten foundations. This Kayla had discovered that the people worth keeping in your life are the ones who encourage your growth, rather than demanding your silence. Marcus was still in prison, and would be for several more years. My parents were still visiting him, still hoping for reconciliation, still not understanding why their family had fallen apart. But I had built something new and strong and honest from the ashes of what they had destroyed through willful blindness. I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst impulses. Sometimes protecting the innocent matters more than preserving the comfortable. Sometimes the family you choose is healthier than the family you're born into. The music changed to something slower, more romantic. Diego pulled me closer as we swayed together, his arms strong and gentle around me. I thought about Tessa, safe and thriving in Colorado. I thought about the other women Marcus had hurt, finally able to speak their truth and seek justice. I thought about the clients I worked with every day, rebuilding their strength and their faith in their own worth. I thought about Marcus, alone in his cell but finally sober, finally honest, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had done. I didn't forgive him, and I didn't plan to resume a relationship with him when he was released. But I hoped he would use his remaining prison time to become someone worthy of the second chance he would eventually receive. The song ended, but Diego and I kept dancing. Around us, our friends and chosen family continued celebrating, their laughter and conversation creating a soundtrack of joy and possibility. This was what love looked like when it was healthy, supportive without being enabling, honest without being cruel, strong enough to survive the truth. I had lost a brother and gained a sister. I had lost parents and gained a husband. I had lost the illusion of a perfect family and gained the reality of people who would stand by me when standing by me was difficult. It was a fair trade, and I would make it again without hesitation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.